Do you know what happened when all Roman lines failed? When the young soldiers fell, the veterans retreated, and the enemy could almost touch the legion's standard. That was the moment Rome played its last card. And it had a name, the Triarii. Few know the true role of these men. They were the army's final reserve, the most experienced veterans, positioned at the rear and called upon only when everything was about to collapse. Not by chance, the Roman saying went, "We've come to the Triarii," meaning it's now or never. But who were these soldiers? What made them so special? What you're about to discover might completely change your view of the Roman military machine. Because to understand the Triarii is to understand the exact moment when Rome refused to fall. To understand how these men, who represented the legion's last hope, came to be, we need to go back in time. Before the Triarii, Rome was still learning the art of war and learning it from others. At first, the Roman army was a shadow of what it would become. Directly inspired by the Greek phalanxes and adapted by the Etruscans, the tactical model was simple and rigid. Tight ranks, shields pressed together, spears extended forward. It was a human wall, solid but static. And like any wall, all it took was the right breach to bring it down. Early Romans organized their armies based on citizens' wealth. The richest made up the first class, positioned on the front line with expensive gear. Long spears, huge shields, heavy helmets. It was an elite that fought with honor, yes, but with rigidity. And that rigidity would soon become a burden. In the hills of central Italy, in rugged valleys and narrow trails where ambushes were common, this formation showed its weaknesses. Against fast enemies, mobile tribes, unpredictable strategists, the phalanx was a prison, a giant that couldn't turn to fight. And if Rome wanted to survive, it would have to change. Then came the revolution. Not overnight, but out of necessity. Rome abandoned the single block and began dividing its infantry into flexible lines, adapted to the terrain, the situation, and the rhythm of battle. In this new system, the youngest soldiers formed the first line, the more experienced the second. But who protected everything from behind? Who would be called only when the world was about to collapse? The Triarii. It wasn't just a name change. It was the birth of an entirely new role. They were no longer part of a blind block of spears. They were designed for the unpredictable, for the moment when Rome had nothing left to lose. Their presence was strategic, their entry calculated, and their purpose clear: restore order or die trying. But no transformation is complete without an architect. And in the case of the Roman army, that architect was Marcus Furius Camillus, one of the great military geniuses of the Republic. In the 4th century BC, Rome faced internal crises and external threats from all sides. It was a time of instability and innovation. It was under his leadership that a simple but powerful idea emerged: to divide the army into 3 lines, each with a clear role on the battlefield. Thus was born the model that would shape the legions for centuries, and with it, the Triarii would finally take their definitive place. At the front were the hastati, young, impetuous, brave, but inexperienced. They were the vanguard, the first to feel the impact of battle. Behind them stood the principes, more mature soldiers with greater resources and training. They were the heart of the fight. And then, at the rear, the Triarii. Silent, imposing, they waited for the right moment to act. These veterans formed the 3rd line, the one that ideally should never be used. The logic was simple. If the battle could be won without them, all the better. But if everything collapsed, the Triarii would enter with full force. Armed with long spears called hastae, reinforced shields, bronze helmets, and bodies marked by past campaigns, they didn't come to hold the line, they came to decide it. And it was during the wars against Carthage that the Triarii proved, once and for all, why they were the silent soul of the legion. The Punic Wars were trials of survival. Rome faced a cunning, relentless enemy, led by one of the greatest military minds of antiquity, Hannibal Barca. As he crossed the Alps with war elephants and crushed entire armies on fields like Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and the fateful Cannae, Rome was forced to rethink every detail of its military machine. During the Battle of the Great Plains in North Africa, when the Roman armies faced Carthage's allies with everything on the line, the Triarii were unleashed at the precise moment the Roman line seemed ready to break. Dust rose, the screams multiplied, and they advanced, cold, organized, and lethal. But it was at Zama, in 202 BC, under the command of Publius Cornelius Scipio, that the Triarii entered history as a symbol of tactical dominance. Hannibal, finally challenged on his own land, tried to shatter the Roman lines with his feared elephant charges. And when chaos seemed inevitable, when the first and second lines were already at their limit, the Triarii advanced from the rear, with pinpoint precision. In wedge formations, spears at the ready, and nerves of steel, they faced what remained of the Carthaginian forces and sealed the fate of the war. They were the turning point, the final blow in the battle. It was in that moment that their tactical importance ceased to be theory and became living proof that discipline and patience could defeat even the most formidable of foes. And this silent force, which decided battles at the most critical moment, drew its power not only from experience, but also from everything they carried with them. Every detail of their armor told a story, and it wasn't a story of appearance, but of survival. The Triarii's primary weapon was the asta, a long spear designed to keep enemies at bay and pierce through ranks with precision. But if the combat became too close, and it inevitably did, they would draw the gladius, the short and lethal sword that made the Roman army famous. With swift strikes and precise thrusts, it turned the fight into a deadly dance. A dance the Triarii mastered to perfection. At first, they protected themselves with the clipius, a sturdy round shield. But over time, they adopted the scutum, the rectangular shield typical of the legions. It was as if they had absorbed the best of each military generation: strength and tradition, adaptability and innovation. But the shield went far beyond physical protection. Many Triarii decorated their shields with images of their ancestors, faces sculpted in relief, eyes fixed on the enemy. It was as if they carried with them the memory of their lineage, of the dead who watched every step. This wasn't just superstition, it was psychological warfare. Their bronze helmets often featured feathers or crests, not only to intimidate but also as symbols of status. And under the Mediterranean sun, these plumes danced in the wind while the Triarii stood motionless, waiting for the order to strike. They wore metal breastplates or chainmail, which, though heavy, posed no obstacle to men already hardened by endless marches and grueling battles. But perhaps the most powerful symbol of the Triarii wasn't made of iron, it was made of words. In ancient Rome, when all seemed lost, people would say it was time to call in the Triarii, an expression that transcended the battlefield. It was the equivalent of playing your last card, drawing on whatever strength you had left. It was the moment of truth, and that phrase, passed down through generations, echoed not only among soldiers but throughout Roman culture as a symbol of final resistance. But even the most legendary warriors must face the weight of time. And for the Triarii, that time came at the end of the 2nd century BC. Rome was changing. The world around it was bigger, more complex, more dangerous. Wars were no longer regional, they had become global campaigns, fought in deserts, forests, and distant mountains. The enemies were no longer tribal, they were powerful kingdoms, professional armies, sophisticated strategies. And Rome needed to adapt once again. That was when Gaius Marius emerged, an unrelenting reformer, a visionary general who looked to the future and decided to bury the past. In 107 BC, he launched a series of reforms that would transform the Roman army from a citizen militia into a professional war machine. The logic was simple. It no longer mattered if you were wealthy, if you belonged to a privileged social class, or if you came from a long line of warriors. What mattered was your ability to fight, learn, and obey. The traditional division between hastati, principes, and triarii was abolished. The legion ceased to be a segmented body and became a uniform block, standardized, trained to act as a single organism, precise, fast, lethal. The Roman army gained efficiency but lost something in the process. It lost the Triarii. There was no longer room for a line that entered only at the critical moment. Now, every soldier had to be ready for everything from the very start. The role of the Triarii dissolved among auxiliary troops, among veterans who continued to fight, but without a name, without a symbol, without distinction. They disappeared, but they were not forgotten. They remained etched in history as the silent pillars of Roman resistance, as the line that does not move until everything is at risk. And even centuries later, their name continues to echo in the very language of Rome. The expression "to come to the Triarii" survived as an eternal reminder. When all is lost, there may still be one last chance. Now, I want to know your opinion. Had you heard of the expression "to come to the Triarii" before? What other legendary unit from the Roman army would you like to see featured here? Write in the comments what you think. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. In the video now on your screen, we'll reveal the story of the rise and fall of the Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite army.